One of the questions that came up during the break is, how do I keep up with the trends? I'm on a lot of websites all the time. I'm actually, while I'm driving down the road, I'm looking at billboards when I should be watching the road. But with the self-driving cars that I'm about to get, they won't matter. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, things tend to change relatively slowly, and there are certain things that will work all the time or most of the time. It will take years before they're so outdated. Something that is using more subtle and muted colors like that, there'll never really be a situation where that just won't work at all. Just a couple things about this. And you can't tell everything because of the light hitting the screen, so you can't see some of the contrast that you normally would. There's more contrast in the picture than you would normally think. So this is a brownish, and then the blue, it tends to be kind of a complementary color, and we'll talk about the use of colors. So complementary colors can be very helpful. And what you're also seeing is I'm tending to communicate one major idea per slide. Now, in a teaching situation, that isn't always the case, but we'll talk about that some because I'm always in a teaching, almost always in a teaching situation, so we'll talk about that. Design for your audience. Again, not for yourself. I've said that before. Something that may look good to you. It may be that your personal sensibilities of what looks good is not really keeping up with what most people are seeing. You got to remember, I mean, walk down any street, or unfortunately, look over into any car. Going down the road beside you. I've literally seen this. Going down the road at 70 miles an hour, look over, and somebody has both hands on their phone. Anyway, so you look at what people are doing. They are looking at the newest, the latest, the greatest, the stuff that's catching their eyes all the time. In fact, in some ways, it's making it a little trickier because they're used to seeing things squished into a smaller space. So more has to be accomplished in a littler, in a smaller area than what you have when you're projecting. Understand your target audience. If you're teaching a group of 6 to 8-year-olds, that's a different target audience than what my target audience is, which is generally 18 to 21 or 22-year-olds, which is different than what it would be if I were teaching, let's see, 50 to 60 to 70-year-olds or whatever. But it's more than that. If you're teaching in a if you're teaching in a VBS, Vacation Bible School, versus teaching in a business meeting, obviously you're doing things probably a little differently. One thing will work for one, and one thing will work for another. So again, you design, understand your target audience. What kinds of things are they used to seeing, and what kinds of things will keep their attention. All right, we're going to break this down into 7 major areas of things that you need to keep in mind as you are designing your slide. And by the way, this entire presentation is available for download in PDF format at my website, which is biblicalintegrity.org, and I'll put that up again this afternoon, biblicalintegrity.org, and I'll show you how to get to it. You'll be able to see all these slides in PDF format. It won't be editable, but you'll be able to keep in mind some of the things that were done. One is supersize your message. obviously, there are several things going on here. It's my first major point, so I have a 1, but then I also have supersized not only the lettering, but the image in the background is kind of supersized. The whale is supersized. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to communicate things in such a way that multiple elements in your presentation are working together rather than working against each other. You want to have as much harmony. In certain cases, disharmony or contrast are good. In other cases, harmony works well. So here you have a harmony of message in multiple areas with a slight bit of contrast just to draw people's attention to different areas of the slide. So one of the things when you're looking at a slide or you're looking at anything, for those of us in the Western world who are used to reading from left to right and top to bottom, that's different than in some parts of the world where you're used to reading from right to left or from top to bottom or whatever. So our eyes tend to naturally flow that direction. So you need to keep that in mind as you're designing your slides. So we're moving left to right, top to bottom. Supersize your image. Another thing that goes along with that is this idea of trying to communicate at a glance. That somebody can look at your slide and they get the main idea that you're wanting to get across as quickly and as easily with as little effort as possible. Again, unfortunately, we're living in a time where, you know, it's no longer the 1800s and people have hours to read by candlelight or whatever it might be. They are used to seeing things fast. They're used to seeing things flash at them. Things can flash at them in just a few seconds. Most of us, our eyes are still focusing while they already know what has already gone by. They are looking for that. They're programmed for that. So we want to try to communicate at a glance. So what have I done in designing this particular slide? Most of the slides that I did are compositions based upon things that I used from the internet. I would have an idea. If you have an idea, you can find it on the internet, literally. It makes no difference what your idea is. If you have an idea, good or bad, hope you stay away from the bad. If you have an idea, good or bad, you can find it within milliseconds, literally, hundreds and thousands of images. The question is as much what not to use as it is what to use. So here you have something that communicates at a glance. Using a picture of just an eye, maintaining, if you've noticed, from slide to slide, I've maintained continuity between main ideas and the font that is used for the secondary idea, as well as the color that's in the secondary idea. So, again, you're actually teaching your audience how to find things on your slide as quickly as possible because of this continuity. If you keep changing up colors and changing up the way you're doing things from slide to slide, you're just creating a jumbled mess, and they're trying to put the whole thing together when actually you're trying to help them get what you're saying. Fortunately, after teaching for 30 years, I'm at the point where I generally don't use notes anymore for teaching or preaching. When I'm preaching, I use the text as my outline, and I don't do the 3 points in a poem, you know, that you're supposed to do, or you're a heretic or something like that. Just joking, folks, whoever takes that seriously. But I use my PowerPoints as the guides for my thoughts. I should have already thought about what I'm going to say before I ever put the slide on the screen, right? So I need to know where I'm going. And it allows me, there's several things it allows you to do. One, it gives you a lot of freedom to look at the people that you're talking to in the eye. You can make connection with individual people all the time. If you're tied to your notes in front of you, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be reading your notes in front of you. In fact, it was because I can so easily do that, and because I like to get things right, whether you might have realized that or not, I like to get things right. I have this everything's a weakness. Every weakness is a strength, and every strength is a weakness. So you got to learn to capitalize on both. We were in Hungary for 16 years. When we opened the Bible Institute in Hungary, I and my colleague, the two of us who opened the Bible Institute, we made the decision that we were going to open the Bible Institute and be teaching in both English and Hungarian in an international school when it opened in less than 2 years. Now, I had a choice that I personally had to make. One is I would write it out in Hungarian, I would have it checked, and I would know that it was word perfect, correct, grammatically and all of that, or I could write my notes in English and I could wing the Hungarian and hope that I got it mostly right. Me, knowing myself, I knew that if it were correct in front of me, what would I do? I would read it. And because my heart's desire was to have as much as a ministry to people by connecting with them, I would rather make a mistake and connect with them by looking at them in the eye. And even if you get close, you've already gobsmacked them, so they have no idea. They've never seen an English speaker speak in Hungarian anyway. So you've already got their attention. So I actually, the whole time that I was teaching in Hungarian, even not just when I was preaching in a church, but when I was teaching, I would teach in Hungarian from English notes, just to keep that connection with the people that I was speaking with. So you want to communicate as much as you can with a glance. Allow your PowerPoint to be your guide. Know your material well enough that that's all you need to guide your next thought. You already have a very good idea what you're going to say. Another thing is, if you're in my particular situation, where there are certain courses that I teach anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 times a year, it helps to tend to keep it a little bit more fresh because I can adjust. And I don't have to say exactly the same thing, although after you do it 5 or 6 times a year, I've got one course I've taught something like 60 times now. You tend to pretty well say the same thing at the same time. But beyond that, this is just a guide. Don't consider it a crutch, consider it a guide. So these are some slides that I created for some seminars and courses that I made, and I'll give you some ideas as to why I chose to do what I did. This is from a leadership series that I developed based upon a book, Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make by Hans Finzel. I came to the horrifying conclusion in 1996 when I read the book that I was guilty of all 10 mistakes. So it radically changed my leadership style and all of that. But now I'm able to use that to help other leadership teams around the world to learn how to avoid some of those mistakes. So I just started looking for pictures of leaders, literally. Just started searching the internet, pictures of leaders. And I came across this one, and when I saw this one, I thought, this is perfect. Why is it perfect? Because it naturally gives you a place right in the center to put the title, because they're reflected in the floor below them. So it's symmetrical. It gives you a great place to put the title, and it just works. Sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you have to work at it. In that case, I got lucky. Also, you notice up here at the top, I used, if I had not used that gradient for creating that background for a leadership series, it would just be sitting out there by itself. It would be hard to read. And so I took some elements that you find in other places, and what is that? Some gradients. So you take elements and then you see if you can use those gradients in different ways to help you design. This one is from a series that I do, The Hard Sayings of Jesus. I found this great picture that is of Jesus teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. And you can see here several things that I did. Feel free to do some creative things with your fonts and your colors. So what did we do? What did I choose to do? Well, first of all, it's about Jesus, so I made that the largest. I did use grid to align these up. The words the and of, they're really not that important, are they? Not that important at all. They can be very, very small. But you have to be able to read them. So I needed to make them a little bit lighter color. I chose to do a gradient with the red on the word hard, because what does red communicate? It can communicate hard, something that's difficult to do. Red is one of those colors that does this. And then sayings is just more neutral. And you also find that there are elements of colors here that you find in different areas here. So you have some harmony of color going on there. I'm not expecting you to, every time you decide that you're going to come up with a slide, actually, to be honest, luck is as good a friend as skill in some cases, and things just happen to work for you better than you ever thought that they would. But again, it's the ability to keep just working with things until you think that they might work well. Matthew, behold the King of the Jews, teaching the book of Matthew. Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. If you're from a design perspective, think of things as a pastor or a teacher or a Bible teacher or a book designer. Why would you use some of the things that are used here? All right. Well, you have something going on here. Let's look at the crowns for a second. Now, I just happened to find that picture. Isn't that a great picture? Now, let me say something about pictures, and I'll say something more about that later. In a teaching situation, as opposed to a publishing situation, if you're going to be publishing a book, then you better buy something where you have the royalties to use it. But in a teaching situation, the copyright is such that as long as you're using it exclusively for teaching and that you're not making money exclusively from the use of that image, you have a lot of copyright leeway to do that. There's only one slide that uses this. I teach it in the context of a course with dozens of slides, so it's not that big a deal. If you're going to print the cover of a book, then or even if you're going to print something it's going to be used for commercial use in some way, then you've got to be more careful. And there are pictures that are available, and I'll talk about that later. But for right now, let's just focus on the image. Two things going on in that picture, why it was such a great find. And again, it's where luck sometimes outdoes skill. I got lucky. What is there about that picture? Right, you have two crowns. You have a royal crown and a crown of thorns. Doesn't that make a great picture for the book of Matthew? Because the book of Matthew is talking about Jesus being born, the King of the Jews being born, and dying so that he can ultimately become the Messianic King of the Jews. So there are two aspects of his life that are being focused. What about the color Matthew? The color for the word Matthew? Royal. Again, something that you think about. It would have had a totally different feel if that had been some sort of yellow going on, right? Wouldn't have communicated the same thing at all. So everything that you're doing, you're communicating something. This is not so important. It's just enough that you can read it. It doesn't overpower everything else, and it gives you a good subtitle. Behold the King of the Jews. This is the course that I've taught probably about 60 times now. God's plan through the ages. So what do we have going on here just from a design perspective? Several things. Some of them may not even be quite so obvious. So one, God had to create, right? That part's obvious. And I found this graphic. Again, I got lucky. I found this graphic, not the text part, but the graphic part. I actually found a calendar overlaying what? The cosmos, a creation. And so you have God's plan through the ages. He's carrying this out in time and space. Another one, got lucky. One of the seminars that I do is on near-death experiences. How many have read the book Heaven is for Real? Anybody read that book? Seen the movie? 90 Minutes in Heaven. The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. Some of those along that line. I've read somewhere between 25 and 30 accounts of claims along that line. And in my course that I teach on current theological issues, because this now tends to come and go. Right now it's in a lull. My guess is it'll pick back up again, but especially when Heaven is for Real came out, this was really a big thing. And I just happened to find this picture where this girl is supposedly rising out of her body. I didn't do that. Somebody else did that. I probably could have figured out a way to do it, but it's much easier to let somebody else do the hard work. So this is another part of my seminar, or the series of seminars that I do on current theological issues. This is one of those seminars. The LGBT, now QRST, LGBT agenda. That's Lady Gaga, by the way, in case you were wondering who the famous person in the picture was. But you see how this works, and you can see why I chose to design it the way I did. So you have her in a rather striking pose, right? Reminds you of a time in our past. Also, the colors that I used for the text. Of course, I could have just put white text up there, but what did I do? I chose to put a color gradient on the text that essentially matched the rainbow's colors of the LGBT movement. So you have, again, these things working together. So I'm just showing you these things of examples that I have done as part of putting different seminars and courses together. This is part of this was a series that I did at a missions conference a few years ago at a church. And they actually gave me the topic. So I had to come up with a graphic that would make the topic, that would work with the topic. And their topic was connecting the world through missions. So first thing I do is I start doing a search on the internet on a world, a global map, and then I decide, okay, let's just try, see what we can find connecting the world. And this popped up, and I'm going, seriously? How does it get any better than that? And so then you start using several elements together to tie things together. For example, as you notice, I'm just kind of going through the thought process with you from somebody who designed this. So you have these lines connecting the dots together, but they're just a little bit fuzzy, obviously. So when I did connecting at the top, what did I do? The white outline that I put on there, it kind of tends to match the same kind of thing that you have going on here. The world is in bold, but it is in relief a little bit. It's not 3D, but it does have a shadow. And then through missions was kind of a subtitle of the whole thing. All right, now going to the question we had earlier, and I understand if you're in a situation where you're in a business where you're expected to project data, teachers are also expected to project data because students really like to know what's going to be on the test. So here's my personal suggestion after doing this for a long time. Project what you absolutely need to and what you're going to be talking about, and give handouts with the smaller data that you need to point out if it has important information. So try to reduce to a bare minimum the amount of information on the screen, because you really will lose the people. They won't be looking at the individual data points. So project what is absolutely necessary, and if you have a document that needs printed that has a lot of information, print it and refer to it. Another thing that you can do, and this gets a little trickier and I haven't got an example here, if you have to put up something like a spreadsheet where you've got lots of numbers, okay? This is going to take you some more work. In the end, it's worth it. Make all of the colors except the one you're talking about lighter than everything else, and either circle or darken or do something bolden to make the data point that you're talking about, make that stand out by itself. Even if in some cases it may mean you making 20 slides. All you have to do is hit Control-C, Control-V, or Control-D, and you've copied your slide. And then do something with that individual data point. Let me give you an example. This is from my course, God's Plan Through the Ages. Now, each of these is very important information. You want your students to get this information. So let's just go through it. This is typically, unfortunately, the way data is often presented by pastors and teachers and others who need to get information across. So here's an example. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God God existed from all eternity in three distinct persons. God's plan was to establish a kingdom of righteousness. God's procedure was to create a realm and subjects. God's purpose, and you can read the rest of it. Now, from the perspective of understanding what God is doing, every single thing is important, right? Everything's true, everything is important, and you want your students to get it. The question is this: from the perspective of being a good communicator and a good teacher, is there a better and more effective way to get across exactly the same information that your students will remember? Because I can promise you that the only way your students are going to remember this is if they copy it down word for word and then memorize it. It's the only way they're going to do it. And if that's the way you want to test them, okay, that's your choice. However, the problem is the people in your congregation are not going to be tested. The people in your Sunday school are not going to be tested. Only if you happen to be teaching at a seminary or a college are they going to be tested. So the point is this: you want everybody you're teaching to remember this information. Is there a way that you can present it, that you get across the same information in a memorable way that they'll never forget? Okay, let's try it. This is what I did. There are millions of ways to do it. This is the way I chose to do it. We'll drop that. In the beginning, God. It's just a phrase. Now I talk about what I mean. What do I mean when I say in the beginning, God? In the beginning, God existed as a triune being, one God, three persons, co-equal, co-eternally subsistent, the eternal Father, the eternal Son, and the Holy Spirit, needing nothing outside of themselves. This is the way the Bible begins. The Bible doesn't even attempt to prove that God exists. Do you ever think about that? We have a whole apologetics ministries built around the idea of trying to prove that God exists. And there is a place for that kind of ministry. Part of what I do is involved with that, dealing with arguments for the existence of God. The thing is, that's not where the Bible starts. The Bible assumes the existence of God. So why don't we start where the Bible starts and then fill in the holes later? Okay? So, here's the first point. Second point. Then I talk about the person of God. Now, there are a couple of things that I've done here that you didn't realize is going on in the background. But from a design perspective, let me show you how I accomplished this. I have two slides. In the beginning, God, then the person of God, the plan of God, and the proclamation of God. Now this gets technical, but I just want to make you aware of what can be done in PowerPoint once you learn some of the details. This is sitting in the background. This is on what's called the slide master, the word God. This is sitting on the foreground. This is what is going to change. And so what am I going to do? I copy this slide multiple times, and then I use a transition called rotate. And so this doesn't move because it's sitting on the same background layer. This moves because that is on the foreground layer and I'm rotating from slide to slide. You don't realize that the slides are actually changing, but they actually are each time. And again, I'm not expecting you to remember everything. What I'm hoping that you learn is that there are things that you can do only in PowerPoint. Again, I'm not using a bunch of fancy other video type programs. These are things that can be done within PowerPoint alone. So, what changed? Well, the background stayed the same because it was on the master layer. The master layer is what sits behind everything. But on the top layer, the one you work with, I have the person of God. What was God like? Again, talking about what God was like. Then the plan of God. God's plan was to establish a kingdom of righteousness that would last from all eternity. He created Adam and Eve, who would be the regents of his kingdom on the earth. How do we know that Adam and Eve were to be his regents? Because he gave them dominion. Dominion implies rulership. So it has always been God's plan to have a godly man as the regent on the earth, ruling over his kingdom on the earth. We know that we have a first Adam who failed, and we have a second Adam that the first Adam was a type of, but the second Adam what? Will not fail. The first Adam had a bride, her name was Eve. The second Adam will have a bride, and she is the church. And that will be her role in the kingdom. So you can see, same information. What is more likely for a student to remember in today's world? The proclamation of God. After God had created everything and he looked at his creation and he saw at the end of the creation week, he had a declaration, and his declaration was that everything was very good. See, that's what people will remember. You're putting the idea there. See, people who know, you're going to run into people who don't know the Bible all that well. That's true. You're always going to have a mixed audience. But you hope that those who don't know anything about the Bible will at least be able to follow your main points. They won't remember your bullet point, but they will remember each of these main ideas that you're giving to them. And that's what we want to do as Bible teachers. All right, next idea. Use great images, if possible. Now this is another one of those cases where I got really lucky, not with the dropping of my pointer. Another case where I got really lucky. I found this picture on the internet. Now there are several great things about this picture that are not working so well with the, there we go, with the pointer. All right, talk to me about this particular picture. First of all, let me say this. That picture was quite a bit bigger than the way it appears on the screen now. So I sized it and I cropped it for a very specific reason, but it did use those muted colors. The color scheme is skewed just a little bit. Those aren't true colors, are they? They're skewed just a little bit and they're muted a little bit. They're toned down a little bit. So what did I do? What did I do?
Are you talking about she's focusing? So you're focused.
She's focusing her camera.
How do you know it's a she?
Well, at this point, that's a good point, but at this point, that's fairly irrelevant.
I'm just saying.
And in today's world, it's definitely irrelevant. Okay. Okay. I think, if I remember correctly, the picture that I used, she was centered in the picture, and the picture was quite a bit bigger. So what do? I changed the size of the picture, and I moved the center of the picture to do what? To create a space for my title, which was in exactly the same space as the title that I used on the supersize images, right? So here you have, notice this, you have continuity. Let me back up here and look at it from a little bit different angle, okay? So here you have supersize your image, and then here use gray images. See what happened here? So you manipulate the images, change the size, change the centering, and you create a space for your title. You don't have to go with just what was given to you.
How did you change that color?
Actually, this particular one, the color was exactly like that. I just happened to, I got lucky. I know how to change color, but you have to use you can do it in PowerPoint, but it's a little bit more difficult in PowerPoint. I'm sorry, say that again?
On the phone, they have editing, and then, the different color things, and then you could download it.
Yes, you can do, there are many.
Is he using Photoshop or Microsoft Picture?
When I do stuff like that, I use my Photoshop. Yep. Okay. Present your big idea visually. All right. Now, this is another example. You may think I'm good. Actually, I think I'm lucky. This is very lucky. Very lucky. I found this picture, but I didn't find it this way. I found it the mirror image of this picture. It was flipped the other way. So what did I want to do? Well, if I had flipped it the other way and this was over here, then it would have run into conflict with the big idea here. So what did I do? I just flipped it. Mirror image. So present your big idea. Again, remember, notice the two fonts I'm using. Have you noticed through the whole thing, except for the slides that I created for the courses, which are obviously different, all of the fonts in the main part of the presentation, I've only used two fonts. Just two. Now, what is one of the biggest mistakes that happens when people create presentations? Dozens of fonts. Every slide has different fonts. This has two. Only two. And they're largely the same color. A blue and or its complement in the pink range for that one slide. These are the same. And this is also great too. It's a great picture because a picture with a bright light bulb gives you what? What does it communicate? An idea. An idea. What have I done? Present your big idea visually. A picture that presents the big idea. So let me give you some examples of some pictures that I found. Some I created, but mostly I just happened to find. Believe it or not, I found that picture of a sword laying on a Bible. And I think 2 times ago, I taught, I guess it was this time last year, I taught Apologetics, Defending the Faith. What better picture could you get? And then you change where the picture sits on the slide. What do? You create a space for the title by changing the size of the picture. If the title had been laying over this, would it have been near as effective? No. You create empty space for your title, and you find another place, something else to take up the rest of the picture, or the rest of the slide that communicates the idea. So again, the idea of defending the faith and the sword, the Bible with a sword, you're communicating the same idea. Try to do both together. I love this picture. Another example. This is one of those pictures that begged to be used, right? It begged to be used as a title picture, right? Why? Well, one, it's a great painting, and there are a lot of great paintings out there. But not only that, it had a natural space for what? For the title. I didn't even have to do anything. I may have resized things a little bit to make it work better. But another thing that I did was, there is a little bit of 3D going on there, but very subtly. And it highlights the outline to make it stand out from the dark background. And it also complements, I chose a color that complements what? The color in the lion. So what's it do? Even though it's standing off by itself, it pulls everything together visually. Everything is pulled together visually, and that's what you're trying to do. You want your message to be in harmony, you want your picture to be in harmony, you want your colors to be in harmony. They can be in contrast, and we'll talk later about what it means to have pictures that have colors that are in contrast. There's a place to use them in harmony, there's a place to use them in contrast. Sometimes you use them together. 7 Marks of a Disciple. This comes from a book by Mark Bailey. Here I did a couple of different things. I actually found a picture of someone carrying a cross. And now I did not do this in PowerPoint, but in Photoshop, I simply cut out the background around that shadow and then overlaid it on top of a sunset. And it works perfectly, creating a place for the title. And the nice thing about this, again, what happens? The clouds as a shadow, create a natural background for the title. So those are the kinds of things you're looking for. You want to do the least work possible, because we don't have a lot of time to mess with, do most of us. Do the least work possible, be creative, and the things we're looking for, you will be amazed about at what's out there. Just be a little creative in how you put things together. All right, Dr. DeYoung will be back at the next hour. Thank you very much.
I just saw you had 200 and some slides in this. That must have taken forever.
I have thousands of slides.